So welcome to the channel, this tactical intellectual channel. We have our fifth and final installment of the Near East and Southwest Asia series. Everything else will be building on top of it because this series was just a foundation. And you know what? I haven't even told you what it's about. So this presentation is talking about the Iranian Plateau, the original populations that seeded the Iranian Plateau and made everything pop. Okay, so like my other videos in general, and especially my other parts, I'm definitely going to provide evidence in this show and prove session. I'm going to make logical inferences. There won't be any deceptive history here. I certainly don't twist history and twist what is being said to fit my narrative. Actually, there is no narrative that I'm speaking of. The narrative is the information. What is the information telling us? So I've done enough talking, so let's go ahead and jump into the information and build our case. So yeah, you did indeed hear that right, man. I'm case building regarding what? Well, it's regarding the original melanated people of the Persian Empire, Persian area, who seeded the area. That's what we're going to get into right now. We're going to start off by examining the book, The Negro in the New World by Sir Harry H. Johnston. Now, the reason I'm getting into this is to reiterate the tribes and groups of people who are Negro. On 27, you see the pictures here, and then you see it's talking about the Elamites of Mesopotamia appear to be a Negro people, equipped, of course, with Negro features that they spread to the Judeans, or they say Jews, the Syrians, the Assyrians, and other groups of that area, the Mesopotamian area. And no doubt it spread to the Persian lands because Persia absorbed all of those areas. Keep in mind, you were passing your melanated features of your Elamite group on to other melanated people. Think Elamites to Oromo, to Arabs, to Egyptians, and everything, and back and forth. So that's logic right there. So let's go ahead and elaborate and use source materials. So this is for the people who hadn't seen the previous 4 videos of the series and are just hopping onto this one right here. We're about to establish some things, some facts. We're going to go into the racial history of man by Roland B. Dixon and check out the original population of Persia. Beginning on chapter 4, which is page 306, you see the Western Plateaus and the Caucasus, the Iranian Plateau. We're not going to read that. We're going to instead start on page 307. Now, check it out. It's saying that in speech, the early peoples were probably non-Indo-European. Hint, hint. In the south, along the shores of the Persian Gulf, there was a narrow fringe of dark-skinned, grizzly-haired folk of simple culture, blends perhaps of the Proto-Negroid and Proto-Australoid types, comparable with a large part of the population of southern India today. Alright, so let's stop right there. On the screen, I have page 27 of the Negro in the New World, and notice what it says underneath these pictures here. And take note of the visual also. 28, a Negroid tribe of southern India. And then 29, Negroid bush-like tribe of southern India. See what they look like. So, I mean, you got to put that image back in Persia. And also, you can kind of tell that they're a blend of, just the regular Negro and the kind of the Australoid, Aboriginal type looking people. So let's go back to page 307 of the racial history of man and resume where we left off. And it says, alright, at a period still uncertain, but which must go back toward the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC, the plateau was invaded from the north by an Indo-European speaking people, probably in the main a blend of Caspian and Mediterranean types. Alright, take note. The other portion of these invaders, who brought with them the horse from Central Asia, pushed southwestward into the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, and under the name of Kassites conquered Babylon and ruled it for several hundred years. This movement of Indo-European peoples seems to be the first clearly traceable wave of Caspian Mediterranean type, others of which from this time on for some 1,500 years continued at intervals to invade the Western Asiatic uplands, both from the region of the Caspian Sea and from Europe across the Bosphorus. Alright, so we're going to drop down, and it reads, the results from the racial point of view of these invasions were, I believe, in the main two. First, as a consequence of the pressure of the invading peoples, some of the older brachycephalic folk were forced out southeastward toward the region of the Indus Delta and so on down the western coast of the Indian Peninsula. Others perhaps across Oman or to Oman in southern Arabia, where they contributed a strong brachycephalic factor to the population. Second, the remainder of the more original brachycephalic peoples became gradually blended with the Caspian Mediterranean conquerors, whose language almost wholly replaced their own. Now, we already know that Indo-European is code word for white, or what they deem Caucasian today. We do have confirmation that the early peoples of the Persian geographic area were non-Indo-European, and most definitely melanated Negro peoples, whether they be the conventional looking melanated person or the Australoid, who's basically a Negro with straight hair, that's all. Don't lose sight of the fact that they had a large presence. They were the original peoples. Now, the main takeaway is that there were invasions coming from the east. Now, in the Arab video, part 3b, I made the point of speaking about the pale Arab and the regular melanated original Arab. The same thing applies here. You know, those invasions coming from the east, I think it was twofold when it comes to their racial designation. I think you had the original people that was coming from the east, and then I think you had the band that were racially pale, and those were the ones who had all these recessive traits and things. I think they were basically pale Indio or Australoid type peoples that, you know, just develop recessive traits with, you know, skin, hair, and eyes, OCA2. So now I ask you guys to please bear with me, because it's gonna seem like I'm jumping around haphazardly, but it all makes sense. It's all coherent and it links together. I'm kind of wielding this information like a sword, but I will definitely come back to Racial History of Man, page 308. But let me play this clip right here and share some information after the clip.
The Middle East is the most melting pot region of the world. There are black, white, brown, Indian-looking and Mongoloid-looking people in this region, all of whom claim to be native and indigenous to this region. And for example, in Arabs, there are black, white, and mixed, the so-called brown Arabs. The same goes for Iran. There are many different ethnic groups in Iran. There are Mongoloid-looking Turkmens, there are Indian-looking Baluch, there are native blacks, there are white-looking Turks, there are mixed-looking Kurds and Lurs. Which of them is the true Iranian? These people are mostly Turks or descended from Turks. For example, here in Iran, up to 40% of people are Turks, and I don't know how many of them are descended from Turks, meaning are related to Turks. And the most white-looking people of Iran are mostly Turks, but there are also Russian, Georgian, and Armenian people too living in this region. And we all know that Turks are not an indigenous people to this region. they came from southern Russia and the Central Asia in recent centuries, and they cannot be an indigenous people to this region.
So that was some really good information right there in that video clip. He's definitely telling the truth. Now, he said something that may go over a lot of people's heads. He said in Iran, up to 40% are Turks. I'm not sure how many are descended from Turks. Now, that probably sounds contradictory to the untrained ear, but this is what he's saying right here. He's saying up to 40% of these people are, direct relationship, straight up from Turkey or the other spot. I'm not sure how many are descended from Turk-like people, Well, you know what? Let's go ahead and go to page 308 and clear some things up. All right, so we're back on page 308. Let's drop down and go ahead and resume. It says, from the period of the Medo-Persian kingdoms for 2,000 years or so, new immigrants from time to time came to add to the racial complex of the Iranian Plateau. Hellenic culture was spread in the Seleucidian period by colonists and traders from Greece and Macedonia, bringing probably both Mediterranean, Caspian, and Alpine factors, while later Parthians and other peoples from Turkestan and vicinity, bringing Caspian and Alpine elements, exerted some influence in Khorasan and Western Afghanistan. Let's drop down. Only the Arab conquest in the 7th century and the Turkoman could have brought any considerable dolichocephalic elements. I do emphasize the stan in these things because that'll give you a picture and idea of where these people really come from, their actual ancestral homeland. And also to answer your question, like if what that guy in the video said went over the head in reference to his statement of not knowing the actual percentage of those who are descended from Turks, alluding to these places here: Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. Did I say Uzbekistan? All of those areas in the Stans area, Stankasia, that's how I refer to those places as, and people who are actually descended from those places. So we're going to resume on page 309 of the Racial History of Man book. The highlighted portion reads that there are other much more brachycephalic groups in the same region. However, is shown by the fact that the Bakhtiari in the districts between the Isfahan and the Kermanshah are probably strongly brachycephalic, although here the practice of cranial deformation must be taken into consideration. Other groups of more or less undefined Persians in this region, Hajemi, Tajiks, etc., take note of that, show a high proportion of brachycephalic factors, greatly exceeding in this respect the Kurds and other mountaineers. In general, most of these peoples are over medium stature, and with few exceptions have black or very dark hair and eyes, although lighter shades of both are occasionally met with among the Azerbaijan Tatars in Fars and Western Kirman. The Western Persian area thus seems to have a rather mixed population whose basis apparently is brachycephalic, with a large element of dolichocephalic Caspian Mediterranean type, particularly noticeable among the mountain and extreme border people, precisely the region in which the Kassite and Medo-Persia influence must have been strongest. So I have a few thoughts on this. Now, when it comes to the Kassites, we don't really know what type of people they really truly were. I've read things or information about them that was stating that they are Hamitic people, and if they had connections to the rest of Mesopotamia, then that we have to go along with that. Now, if they came from, the Hittites, who were living in Anatolia during that time and then came southward and took over, then Anatolia was highly melanated during that time. I'm definitely going to do a video presentation on old Anatolia before the Turkmenistans came over and dominated. But going back to page 309, the main theme that I take away from this is the concept of the mixture is highly diverse. And then it speaks about these less undefined, in quotes, Persians, which were really the Tajikistans, the Hajamis, and other Central Asians. So that's going to take me back to the book Sex and Race, of course, by J.A. Rogers. And we're going to check out chapter 3, and we're going to check out the race mixing component of the area back then. So it says the mixing of white and black in the ancient East. The great areas of race mixing in the ancient world were both shores of the Mediterranean, Asia Minor, and Arabia, all the territory bordering on the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. Keep in mind that Asia Minor is what we consider Turkey today, which was Anatolia back then. Can't have race mixing without the two elements. Next page, starting at with, and it reads, with the Assyrian invasion of Esarhaddon, there came an influence of Asiatic strain into the Egyptian population. We say Asiatic because it is impossible to say just how much white strain there was in it. It was in all probability largely a mulatto strain, as pale or fair Aryan and melanated or black Elamite, as will be seen later, had been mixing in all this Asiatic area for thousands of years. After the Assyrians came the Medes and Persians, who were also a mulatto race. The nearest to what was a pure white infusion in the Egyptian population came with the conquest of Alexander the Great in 335 BC and the later rule of Ptolemy, one of his generals. Now, when you go back to the Encyclopedia Iranica article on Dulafoy, you really get a good grasp of what he means when he's talking about this portion right here. And he says, but having discovered representations of both black and white men among the enameled brick archers, he was led to conclude that the indigenous population of Susiana had been black. He identified them as Negritos. Dulafoy went on to identify the black archers as the Susianan platoon of the Immortals, the royal guard mentioned by Herodotus, and the whites as Aryan immigrants and thus the Persian contingent of the guard. But that goes back to the point on 309 that these Persians that we see in this encyclopedia article were these Persians that are more or less undefined, meaning that they are the Central Asians, the Tajiks, the Uzbekistans, the Yamnayans, and etc. Sex and Race, Chapter 4, Syria, Palestine, Arabia, and Persia. It says, the Near East was the scene of another vast amalgamation of black and white, evidences of which are offered by both mythology and archaeology. I did discuss this before, but I wanted to reiterate this point of mixture. Going to the next page, it says, Darius the Great, whose capital was Susa, had wives of many races, and might have been a mulatto or a black or melanated man himself. I do not doubt that fact at all. Let's go to the next page and reinforce some things. It says, the ruins of a splendid Negrito civilization have also been unearthed by Dulafoy in Persia at Susa, the Shushan of the Bible, where Ahasuerus, king of Persia and Ethiopia, chose the beautiful Esther as his wife. Esther was a Benjaminite woman, so she wasn't Jewish, or she wasn't from the tribe of Judah. She was an Israelite woman from the tribe of Benjamin. Yes, there's a difference. Speaking of unearthed ruins, let's check out these wall sculptures from the Babylon, Persia, Elamite area. So I'm glad they preserved them. See how he looks there? You know, the other option is destruction, and I'm glad they didn't do that because these sculptures tell the story. You know, they validate what we're saying right now. See how this guy looks there? I mean, it looks like a brother. That is a brother. See these guards here? You know, different complexions, but you know what? I have a, well, see these griffins here with the highly melanated skin complexion. See this guy? He's still well preserved. Good. Or they probably just restored it in the original colors. Now, no doubt some of these guys probably had this complexion, or it probably deteriorated over time, the paint that is. Now see these? Yeah, now this is what I want to get at here. This is a 11th century Byzantine piece of work here, and you can see the people on the left with their garb, and see these people on the right, and then you see what's in the trees next to them. Those are instruments, so you know what that is. Here's a close-up. If you read Psalms 137, you know what this is. You know what you're looking at, and it's a legit picture. It's not AI or Chat GPT productions or anything of that nature. This is an 11th century Byzantine painting or piece of art, and you see the people on the left, those are Babylonians right there, and the people that's on the right, those are the original indigenous autochthonous Judeans, descendants of the house of Jacob. Those are Israelites right there. Why I didn't put this in the Palestinian video presentation, I have no idea. But here it is. Here's one of the websites that has the picture up, just in case you think I'm on some major league foolishness. Just do an image search and you'll see who else is using this painting from the 11th century. All right, so we're back in the book, Sex and Race. I'm looking at chapter 4. I'm going to paraphrase, and it's talking about the establishment of the Negritos upon the left bank of the Tigris and the elements constituting the Susian monarchy towards 2300 BC. The plains of the Tigris and Anzan Susinka were ruled by a dynasty of Negro kings. We got that. The coming of this dynasty of Medes corresponded perhaps to the arrival in the south of an immense Scythian invasion, pushed back by the black Susians after having taken possession of the mountains. The whites poured into the plains of the Tigris and remained master of the country until the time when Kudur Nakunta subdued Chaldea and founded Anzan Susinka, and who added to the territory of the blacks Nime, Kusai, Habardip, all the mountainous districts once inhabited by the whites of the Scythian race. Now we move on to this page here, and as you can see, it's talking about Elam or Susa, how they dominated Babylon, in addition to Assyria. Then it talks about the inscriptions of Assur Banipal, and that Kadur Nakunta, he was a Negro king, invaded Chaldea, took some treasure back, most notably the golden statue of the goddess Nana. So I'm going to conclude with this next page here. It says, in short, the influence of this splendid Negro culture extended far to the east and to the west. Elamite and invading Aryan later united to form the Persian people of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes. All right, that's about it for that. Yeah, the key takeaway is that you had a native indigenous Negro population, then you had invading Aryan whites, and then an amalgamation of people, which results in a very mixed population. But you still had the single elements, the indigenous Negro and the pale Aryan, walking around, living their life. So the point of me reading chapter 4 of Sex and Race was to reiterate that whole theme of the mixture. And this right here bolsters that fact. On page 310 of Racial History of Man, it says, in the vicinity of Susa, in the lowland on the borders of the Mesopotamian plain, and southward along the coast of Arabistan and Fars, a rather well-marked Negroid factor is observable. These people are said to be shorter than the average Persian and to have thick lips and broad noses. The only actual measurements in this whole region which we have are those of Housay at Disful. These indicate a preponderance of Caspian Mediterranean factors, and only a small proto-Negroid or proto-Australoid element is dropped down. All of the few living Webres measured and all the adult crania are without exception dolichocephalic, a mixture of Caspian and Mediterranean types. So we again look to the book Environment, Race and Migration, chapter 16, page 212, section D, Races of Southwest Asia. You see in the areas of Arabia, Mesopotamia, Persia, and what they refer to as Turkestan, they found relics of what they say as Negroid or Negrito stratum. And then when you drop down, it's talking about Dulafwa, what he found Negrito or Negro people near Susa, southwest Persia, skeletal remains, that is. But then he says that while no Negroes survive in Syria, there are many skulls being found in the caves hereabouts, which may well indicate the presence of an early Negroid zone. So there you have it. Still not convinced? Well, check this out here.
The ancient inhabitants of the ancient peoples of the Middle East were all different types of black people, different groups of black people. Assyrians were a black people, Persians were a black people, Elamites were a black people, and Arabs, yes, were a black people. That's why you see Assyrians have depicted themselves with curly hair, curly beard, and dreadlocks. That's why you see Persians have depicted themselves with curly hair and curly beard. And even there are many wall paintings found in Susa in which Persians have depicted themselves with black skin, have painted themselves with black skin. So therefore Persians were black people, not a so-called Indo-European. And I believe that Persians, Assyrians, Arabs, and all of the ancient inhabitants of the Middle East were an Ethiopian type of people, the so-called Semites, an Ethiopian type of people. People like the Somalis, like Ethiopians, like Eritreans, like Djiboutis, like dark-skinned Yemenis. You know, they weren't a white people. Why? I don't say this because I'm racist. As you can see, I'm not a black person, and I look mostly like whites than blacks. I just want to tell the truth that the ancient inhabitants of these regions, from Babylonians, Assyrians, Elamite, Persians, Jews, were all black.
So I definitely concur with what he's saying regarding his last statement. The only thing I would alter is I would take out Jews and put in Judeans or the descendants of the house of Jacob. Now, when it comes to the Jews, these are separate people. These are people that's white, European, Middle Eastern, quote unquote, looking. They are totally different from the more Negro, original looking descendants of the house of Jacob, or the Judeans that are from way back in ancient times. So let's go into this here. Now, I want to take 1 minute to have a display of very, very anachronistic pictures. You see how these people are displayed here. We know that that is incorrect, and it's definitely a narrative that's being pushed, and it's bad faith anyway to take the modern day population and throw it all the way back and present the ancient cultures as what you see modern day. That's not the case. We know that from the material cultures, the skeletal remains, the documentations, first-hand accounts, and everything else. But that's just how it is today. Now, one thing I want to speak on is, I'm not doing it in this video presentation, but it will be in future presentations, that I do go over the element that shook up these ancient populations, that came in and changed the, I want to say, both phenotype and genotype of the population. So this wraps up the Near East foundational series. Thank you for the views. So going forward, everything will be meant to correct or be corrective and counteract all the fallacies that we've learned, especially when it comes to the imagery of historical figures. All right, everybody, take care.